Hi, thank you for joining me for my 5-minute Bible study today. Today we continue in the book of Colossians. We're in chapter 2, verse 1. For context, go ahead and read chapter 1, verse 24 to 29, and also chapter 2, verse 1 through 5. Just to make this point, these parts go together. It's all one thing, one thought that Paul's having. Previous section, verse 24 to 29, was a sentence. He's going to have some more thoughts here from 1 to 5. Just to make the point, these chapter breaks and these verses that we see in the books of the Bible, they weren't put in there by the writer. Paul didn't say chapter 2, verse 1. Those were added in over a millennium after Paul wrote this. This was just a letter that Paul wrote. So recognize that when the people put in those chapter breaks and verse breaks, those aren't from God. And a lot of times they put them in the wrong spots. And this is an example of a bad chapter break. This chapter break should not have occurred here in the middle of what Paul was saying. But here we are in the middle of a sentence, basically, a thought. So if you want to look at that context, you need to read the stuff before it and the stuff after it, which is chapter 1, verse 24 through 29, and in chapter 2, 1 through 5. And you'll get the full thought of what Paul's saying here. So with that, let's take a look at chapter 2, verse 1. It says, "For I want you to know how great a struggle I have on your behalf, and for those who are at Laodicea, and for all those who have not personally seen my face." So Paul starts with "for." So it just goes to show you that this, what he's about to say, is connected to what he had said previously. So because of everything I said, "For I want you to know how great a struggle I have on your behalf." And notice there's three things, right? Like how great a struggle I have on your behalf, and for those who are at Laodicea, and for those who have not personally seen my face. So he's looking at three different groups of people. But before we get to that, notice what he's doing. He's talking about how great a struggle he has. Now, that word struggle is the same word, basically the same root word as the word previously for striving in verse 29. And if you go back to verse 24, we remember that Paul talks about his suffering. So in verse 24, Paul talks about his suffering, and we remember that Paul's writing this in prison, so he's suffering in prison. But then yesterday, in verse 29 in chapter 1, we talked about his laboring and his striving, and we talked about what that laboring was and how difficult it is, and that striving, how we get that word agonize from the Greek word for striving. And here it talks about a great struggle, and struggle uses that same root word from agonize. So we can see what Paul's doing here. Throughout this whole thought, he's telling the Colossians that he is an apostle of Jesus Christ, and because of that, there is struggle, there is pain, there is difficulty, there is striving. All these things, they're the same concepts, they're the same words. Paul's making this point of how difficult a road it is for Paul to go and preach the gospel, to share the truth of the gospel, to make disciples. And so we see here that Paul says, I want you to know, Colossians, I want you to know how big my struggle is. Why? Because while Paul's in prison for preaching the gospel, these false teachers going around living life as if no big deal. And in fact, you know that if there were struggles on their side, they would quit really quick because it wouldn't be advantageous to them. So Paul's making this point. This is how I want you to see my struggle, so you know that I'm truly telling you what's on my heart and what's true. So he says that, and then notice there's three people. There's you, Colossians. There's those at Laodicea. Laodicea is kind of a sister city. It's 12 miles away. That was also planted probably by a prophet. And for all those who have not personally seen my face. So all these people haven't seen Paul. Paul's never met any of these people. And yet he struggles and labors and strives and suffers for them. And you know, sometimes I think that we don't have that same heart. If we have to struggle or strive or suffer, we'll just put it on the side and not worry about it. But notice Paul does that for all of these people. So I think number one, the first thing we need to learn from this really quickly is that as Christians, we need to recognize that our life isn't the life of comfort. Our life is a life of struggle if we're going to be true disciples of Jesus Christ. But the second thing is, notice the pastoral heart there. He's not caring about just his one church. Paul's never met these people. He didn't plant this church. Epaphras did. But yet he cares for them and struggles for them. And it's a good note for pastors and church leaders to recognize we're not here to build a church. We're here to build the kingdom, right? So recognize that. Have the heart of Paul. Build the church, but more importantly, build the kingdom. So with that, thank you very much for joining me today. We finished our chapter 2, verse 1 teaching. Tomorrow we'll go to chapter 2, verse 2. So be with us for that. If you have any questions, go ahead and put those in the comments below, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. And until then, have a wonderful day, and God bless you.